When football fans recall the 1978 NFL season, they often celebrate iconic teams, dramatic rivalries, and rule changes that ushered in a new passing era. Yet hidden within that tapestry of dynamic shifts and on-field heroics lies a day of heartbreak that forever altered the trajectory of one young athlete's life and shook the league to its core. The collision that left Darryl Stingley paralyzed did not just impact one career, or even one franchise. It raised urgent questions about player safety, the nature of violence in the sport, and the responsibilities shared by both athletes and the league itself. Even decades later, the tragic event stands as a stark reminder of the fine line between intense competition and life-changing danger. Darryl Stingley came into the NFL as a first-round draft pick for the New England Patriots in 1973. Raised in Chicago, he was an exceptional athlete who excelled in multiple sports. Standing 5 feet 11 inches and weighing around 190 pounds, Stingley possessed a blend of speed and agility that made him a natural fit at wide receiver. His coaches frequently praised his work ethic. He diligently studied playbooks and honed his route running, ensuring that he would be a reliable target for Patriots quarterback. In those days, the NFL had yet to evolve into the pass-heavy spectacle it would later become. Wide receivers were still expected to brave the middle of the field, face punishing hits, and hold on to the football at all costs. Physicality was a badge of honor, and highlight reels often showcased spectacular collisions as a testament to a defensive back's prowess or a wide receiver's bravery. Stingley, soft-spoken off the field but fearless on it, found himself in that vortex of rising athleticism and a culture that glamorized crushing hits. Over the course of 5 NFL seasons, Stingley emerged as a dependable contributor. He wasn't a league-wide superstar, but he had earned respect within the Patriots organization and from attentive fans who recognized his talent. As the 1978 preseason approached, he was only 26 years old and on the verge of entering his athletic prime. The Patriots were hopeful that the upcoming season would be a leap forward, both for the team and for Stingley as a premier target in their passing attack. On August 12, 1978, the New England Patriots traveled to California to face the Oakland Raiders in a preseason contest. Preseason matchups often lack the hype of regular season games, but for players on the cusp of big season, or those fighting for roster spots, these games are anything but inconsequential. Coaches use the preseason to refine strategy, evaluate new talent, and acclimate veterans to game speed. Stingley, eager to prove his continued value, approached it like any other high-stakes competition, fully prepared, mentally and physically. The Raiders, a team known for a rugged, intimidating style under the banner of Al Davis's "Just Win, Baby" mantra, featured some of the league's most hard-hitting defensive players. One of them was Jack Tatum, a safety whose physical play had already become legendary and controversial around the NFL. Nicknamed the Assassin, Tatum had built a reputation for bone-jarring tackles that bordered on, and sometimes crossed, the line between clean defensive hits and reckless aggression. Late in the second quarter, with the Patriots lining up for a passing play, quarterback Steve Grogan took a snap and scanned the field. Stingley burst off the line, looking to run a crossing route over the middle, an area Tatum and Raiders defenders frequently patrolled with fierce determination. The moment Grogan released the pass, Stingley stretched forward to meet the ball. Tatum, closing in at full speed, aimed to dislodge the ball with a thunderous collision. What happened in that split second would change the lives of both men forever. In a violent clash, Tatum's helmet drove into Stingley's head and neck area just as Stingley attempted to make the catch. The impact was so forceful that it immediately sent the young receiver crashing to the turf. Players on both sides, initially unaware of the gravity of the situation, set themselves for the next snap, until they noticed that Stingley lay unmoving, unable to get to his feet. The hush that fell over the stadium spoke volumes. A routine preseason pass had, in the blink of an eye, turned into something catastrophic. As medical personnel rushed onto the field, coaches and players gathered in worried clusters. Some recounted that Stingley's eyes were open, but he was unable to move or respond. Team trainers signaled for a stretcher and paramedics, recognizing that any mishandling could exacerbate a potential spinal injury. The crowd, sensing a terrible moment unfolding, turned eerily quiet, punctuated only by whispers of concern. Stingley was stabilized and transported to a local hospital, where emergency examinations confirmed the worst fears. The hit had fractured several vertebrae in his neck, damaging his spinal cord. Doctors performed urgent surgery in an attempt to relieve pressure and stabilize the injury, but the consensus soon emerged that Darryl Stingley was paralyzed from the neck down. That possibility, often feared but rarely witnessed at such a young age on a major stage, reverberated throughout the sports world. Meanwhile, back at the stadium, the preseason game continued, an unsettling reminder of the NFL's constant churn, even in the face of potential tragedy. Privately, coaches and players grappled with waves of guilt and apprehension. Stingley's teammates were devastated. They had seen him walking in with his helmet and pads just hours before, full of life and promise. Now he was in a hospital bed, fighting to regain even the most basic physical function. News of Stingley's catastrophic injury spread quickly, and it sparked outcry over the NFL's tolerance for violent hits. At the time, the league was in the process of loosening restrictions on passing offenses, hoping to boost scoring and add excitement. Yet defenders across the league often responded by intensifying their hits, especially over the middle, to deter receivers from running fearless routes. While the rulebook contained guidelines against unnecessary roughness, enforcement was inconsistent, and the culture revered big hits as momentum-changing or morale-boosting plays. The collision resurrected heated debates. Should the NFL adopt more stringent rules to protect defenseless receivers? How could coaches promote safer tackling techniques without undermining the natural aggression that defined the sport? Tatum's hit on Stingley, labeled clean by some defenders of old-school football, was widely condemned by others as unwarranted brutality. The lines between legitimate defense and violent recklessness had rarely seemed so blurred. In the weeks following the injury, the league office remained measured in its response. There were no immediate rule changes specifically targeting the type of collision that paralyzed Stingley. However, under the broader umbrella of player safety, the NFL began moving toward policies that would evolve over the next several decades, such as stricter enforcement of hits targeting the neck or head area, and, much later, the implementation of defenseless receiver rules. At the time, these discussions were only just beginning, and real reforms would take years to emerge. Still, the conversation couldn't escape the looming presence of Darryl Stingley's personal tragedy as a harrowing example of what was at stake. If Stingley became a symbol of football's capacity for devastating injury, Jack Tatum found himself caught in a storm of criticism for the role he played. Throughout his career, Tatum had never shied away from punishing collisions, and indeed, he built his legend on them. But the catastrophic outcome for Stingley cast Tatum in a polarizing light. Some felt that while he hadn't intended to cripple Stingley, his aggressive approach was inherently reckless. Others argued that Tatum was simply playing the game the way it had always been played, abiding by the era's mores, and that the injury was a tragic accident. Particularly vexing to many was Tatum's perceived lack of remorse. Publicly, he offered limited sympathy, stating it was never his intention to paralyze or hurt someone for life, but stopping short of apologizing for the hit itself. Over the ensuing years, Tatum wrote multiple books discussing his life in football, devoting pages to the incident with Stingley but never fully bridging the gap in public perception. That gap was only widened by the fact that Tatum and Stingley never reconciled in person, despite repeated attempts by others to coordinate a meeting. For the media and fans, Tatum's unwillingness or inability to show contrition sealed his reputation as a villain, fair or not. While Tatum continued his career, eventually retiring from the NFL in 1980, Stingley faced the monumental challenge of adjusting to life as a quadriplegic. Confined to a wheelchair, he spent weeks in intensive care, followed by grueling rehabilitation sessions aimed at recovering whatever mobility was possible. Friends, teammates, and well-wishers from across the sports landscape rallied around him, raising funds and offering emotional support. Yet, for all the empathy in the sports community, the day-to-day reality was isolating. Stingley's family, including his wife and children, found themselves shouldering the immense burden of medical treatments, logistical hurdles, and the emotional toll of seeing a loved one robbed of independence. Still in his 20s, Darryl transitioned from a gifted athlete to a patient forced to rely on caregivers for every basic need, a dramatic, heartbreaking change that underscored the physical risks NFL players undertake every time they strap on their helmet. The Patriots organization offered ongoing assistance, and Stingley's doctors in Chicago worked extensively to help him regain partial use of his arms. Though he would never walk again, he was eventually able to adapt to some level of autonomy in his powered wheelchair. His spirit, by many accounts, remained remarkably positive considering the circumstances. He often spoke of cherishing the time he could spend with his sons, wanting to be there for them in any way possible, even if it meant cheering from the sidelines rather than tossing a football around. Over the next few years, as Stingley's story faded from the headlines, the NFL continued to evolve. Offensive innovations came to the forefront, ushered in by rules designed to open up the passing game. The late 1970s and early 1980s witnessed the blossoming of quarterback-receiver tandems like Dan Fouts and Kellen Winslow in San Diego, and Joe Montana and Dwight Clark in San Francisco. Defenders still delivered big hits, but the league began scrutinizing hits that targeted the head and neck more rigorously, though there remained a glaring gap between official rules and on-field enforcement. In quiet moments, however, the memory of Darryl Stingley haunted players and coaches alike, reminding them that no matter how routine a play might seem, the potential for catastrophic injury was always there. The NFL's overall safety measures lagged behind the seriousness of these consequences. Helmets and shoulder pads improved incrementally, yet cultural change was slower. It was not until decades later that the league would face a renewed reckoning with head injuries, spinal injuries, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy (CTE). If one can find a sliver of positive in Stingley's situation, it's that his tragedy became part of the critical conversation that eventually nudged the sport toward more protective standards. Jack Tatum's and Darryl Stingley's paths never truly converged again in a meaningful way. Stingley expressed disappointment that Tatum did not reach out with personal remorse, while Tatum insisted that the collision was a hazard inherent to the game. Over time, public opinion coalesced into a narrative that Tatum had refused an apology, and this narrative further demonized him in many corners of the football world. Tatum, for his part, later dealt with significant health issues, including the amputation of his left leg due to complications from diabetes, though many fans struggled to muster sympathy, seeing him as unrepentant for the suffering he had caused. Stingley himself took a measured view in public. He emphasized the complexity of professional football and expressed regret that Tatum seemed unwilling to reconcile. Though he never regained mobility, he found ways to contribute to his community, mentoring youth and speaking occasionally about the importance of proper tackling techniques and player safety. He rarely expressed bitterness, instead focusing on the blessings he did have: family, faith, and life itself. Darryl Stingley passed away on April 5, 2007, from heart disease and pneumonia complication, issues often linked to his long-term paralysis. He was 55. The outpouring of condolences and tributes highlighted the respect he had earned, not merely for his time as a New England Patriot, but for the dignity and determination he displayed after his injury. His sons carried on his legacy with pride, noting that he remained a devoted father despite monumental obstacles. In modern NFL circle, the hit that paralyzed Darryl Stingley stands as a cautionary tale, reminding players, coaches, and fans alike that while football may captivate with its physical drama, it also carries profound risk. Today's league, faced with lawsuits from former players over long-term brain injuries and mounting public scrutiny, has enacted numerous rule changes to prevent the exact kind of hits that felled Stingley. Targeting the head or neck of a defenseless receiver now draws hefty fines and potential suspension. Helmet-to-helmet collisions are regularly flagged, and instant replay often confirms the severity of these infractions. Some critics argue that the game has gone soft, or that these rules hamper defensive players who must make split-second decisions. Others counter that no victory or highlight reel play is worth the life-altering consequences exemplified by the Stingley incident. In many ways, the ongoing debate about safety versus tradition can be traced back to that fateful day in 1978, when the NFL glimpsed, through one harrowing accident, just how devastating its sport could be. Shattered moment. The Darryl Stingley tragedy of 1978 remains etched into NFL history as more than just an unfortunate collision. It is the story of a talented athlete who lost the use of his limbs in a single cruel second of contact, and of the league's grappling with its own identity, a sport that thrives on controlled violence yet must acknowledge the real human cost when that violence goes unchecked. For all the heroics that define football's appeal, the last-minute touchdowns, the spectacular catches, the improbable comebacks, Darryl Stingley's experience is an enduring reminder that each snap carries stakes far beyond a scoreboard. In a game measured by inches, one devastating collision can alter a life forever. His legacy is a call for greater compassion, empathy, and vigilance in a sport still searching for ways to protect its players without losing the spirit that first made it great. And though the NFL of today is significantly safer than it was in 1978, the memory of Darryl Stingley's tragedy echoes through every helmet-to-helmet flag, every rule revision, and every conversation about the balance between ferocity and responsibility, an eternal cautionary note that behind the thrilling spectacle, real lives hang in the balance.